Located in the southern extremes of the South Pacific, the islands of New Zealand have been populated for only 1,000 years. Northland, a narrow strip of land between the Pacific Ocean and Tasman Sea, attracted the country's first permanent settlers, the Maoris. Kai moana, or food from the sea, still a local delicacy. The ancestors of the present-day Maori came to these shores by canoe. Attracted by the good climate and ample food, they settled in different tribal groupings. The main concentrations have always been in the northern regions. Maori settlements were on ridges and hills that could be easily defended. The contours of their defensive stockades and terraces can still be seen. The Maori brought with them a sweet potato, or kumara, from their Pacific Island homelands. Storage pits still pockmarked the land. Christianity. By the 1830s, missionaries and traders were making regular calls to the New Zealand coast, and small settlements were being established. Most of the European settlers were of English descent. They were attracted to the new land by its temperate climate and agricultural potential. To some, it was a chance to establish an England of the South Seas. In 1840, New Zealand became a British colony. Conflict with the Maori arose over the loss of their lands, and a rebel chief symbolically cut down the government's flagpole. There were land wars until a more lasting peace was achieved. As the site for the first capital, the governor chose a sheltered harbour in the picturesque Bay of Islands. The old capital, Russell, is today a quiet coastal town. Its history and setting make it one of the country's most popular tourist areas.
The Bay of Islands itself is a very important part of our early European history. It's Russell today. In the 1820s, this was our first trading port. Over 150 ships came into this little town every year. Now, across on the left of us there is another very significant part of the Bay of Islands. You can see the large flag mast standing there on the foreshore. Behind it is the Treaty House, built for the first resident governor, James Busby. That's where the Treaty of Waitangi was signed on February the 6th in 1840. This was between the Maori chiefs and the British, and made New Zealand part of the British colonies.
one of the natural resources that first attracted seafarers to New Zealand's northern waters. The tall native trees made ideal spars. Today, selective logging still takes place. The home of a unique variety of animal and bird life, New Zealand was once almost totally covered by a cloak of dense subtropical forest. One of the last of the old sawmills still operates much as it did 100 years ago. Now, the native timber is mainly used for furniture and boat building. The old mill sites were close to the sea, allowing easy shipping. Access was relatively simple on the sheltered eastern coast, a marked contrast to the rugged shoreline of the west. The Tasman Sea and its prevailing westerly winds create a coastline completely different from the Pacific coast. The Maori called the east female and the west male. The bar at the head of the Kaipara, New Zealand's largest harbour, has claimed dozens of shipwrecks. Today, the harbour is too silted for large ships to use. On a desolate plateau just inland from the coast, buried remnants of an ancient forest allowed another industry to flourish briefly. Settlers from Dalmatia dug for gum from the native kauri tree. The fields are now all but depleted. The northwestern coast is generally deserted and desolate. One beach runs unbroken for 90 kilometres. Further south, among rocky coves, are the outer fringes of New Zealand's largest city, Auckland.
Beach report, and first a look at conditions on the west coast beaches. An offshore northeasterly wind of 10 to 15 knots. The surface consistent with 4 to 6 foot waves.
West coast surf is an attraction to some.
High tide is expected at 5 o'clock this afternoon, and surf life-saving patrols will be out on west coast beaches today between 9 and 5. It's a beautiful afternoon in Auckland.
To others, the sheltered waters of Auckland's east coast are more satisfying.
Now to conditions on the east coast beaches. They're very pleasant too, and they'll remain calm and warm. And that's our beach and surf report on Auckland 1ZB.
Auckland is situated on an isthmus between the country's east and west coasts, at its narrowest just 2 kilometres wide. The city and suburbs spread around the numerous bays and inlets of the main harbour. A road bridge links the north and south shores. The Maoris named the harbour Waitemata, sparkling waters. Auckland has a population of 800,000 people, over a quarter of the country's total. Their lifestyle has a large emphasis on the outdoors. One day in summer, it seems nearly all Aucklanders are in the streets. It's the annual Round the Bays Fun Run. From Auckland, the country widens out again. The coast of the Coromandel Peninsula joins the sweep of the Bay of Plenty, and then out to the more isolated East Cape. The countryside south of Auckland is dotted with small towns. Most have been established since the early days of the colony. A gold rush in the 1850s created Coromandel, once many times its present size. No matter where New Zealanders live, they're close to the coast. This beach has a special attraction: hot water. At low tide, you only need to dig where the thermal springs are, and by mixing in the right amount of seawater, you can control the temperature. Hot Water Beach is part of the wide belt of volcanic activity that crosses the North Island. At Rotorua, it is more extreme. As well as being New Zealand's most famous tourist attraction, the thermal activity is also used by the local Maoris for more practical purposes, such as cooking. The Maori people make up about 10% of New Zealand's population. The East Coast has the highest concentration of Maoris in the country and is still a strong centre of traditional culture. Its isolation is seen by many as a major asset. A busload of schoolchildren is on its way to a Maori marae, a meeting house surrounded by communal ground. They'll be welcomed by traditional songs and ceremonies performed by elders of the host tribe.
Oh
Throughout the North Island, the terracing of old Maori villages can be made out on strategically placed hills and ridges. But today, most New Zealand coastal towns are sited to make full use of beaches and sheltered harbours. The Bay of Plenty's mild climate helps to make this the centre of New Zealand's new export earner, kiwi fruit. East Cape. This was the first part of New Zealand to be sighted by the English explorer Captain James Cook. He described the rock shapes, one like a cornstack, the other like an arched bridge. He called the striking headland Gable End. It reminded him of the gabled roof of an English house. This is where the sun's rays first rise out of the vast Pacific Ocean onto the mainland of New Zealand. The meat and wool of sheep have for long been a major export earner. There are over 60 million of them throughout the country, more than 20 for every man, woman and child. The country round the East Cape is typical grazing land, hilly and generally dry. The vast areas of rugged country are most easily fertilized from the air. A veteran cargo plane, over 40 years old, has been adapted to take the extra large loads needed. East Cape is the furthest point from the western coast. Across the central plateau, the western shore rounds Mount Egmont and sweeps onto the foot of the North Island. The lush pastures surrounding Mount Egmont support New Zealand's other main industry. It's the most concentrated area for dairy farming. Milk and dairy foods are produced for both domestic and international markets. The cows are milked in highly automated sheds. Large tankers arrive each day at the farm to take the milk directly from the holding tanks to the processing factories. Mount Egmont is the central focus of the Taranaki region. A dormant volcano, it rises 2,500 meters above sea level. A silent sentinel, enjoyed by skiers in winter and climbers in summer. New Zealand's western coast, like the east, is dotted with many small towns. Most serve the needs of the surrounding farming districts, centres for commerce and social activities. Their larger industries are normally agriculture-based, cheese and dairy factories, or freezing works to process meat. These small towns are also the heartland of New Zealand's national sport, rugby. The descendants of Chinese miners, who emigrated during gold rushes in the 1800s, have established themselves on the plains that spread south from Mount Egmont. Their market gardens run to the foothills of the range that border the nation's capital. The ruggedness of the lower North Island gives the city dwellers ample opportunity for escape from the pressures of working life. The bikes are travelling over old beaches that have been raised above sea level by successive earthquakes. Wellington, impressively built on a series of hills that surround its attractive harbour. In 1865, because of its central geographical location, it was chosen as the nation's capital.
Order. We're not debating these now.
Speaker, surely it's obvious to the meanest intelligence.
The government complex, situated close to the city's centre, is dominated by the Beehive, a novel building housing the executive offices. Surrounding the parliamentary buildings are tower blocks that house the bureaucracies and major companies that control the nation's life. But just a few kilometres from the intensity of politics and business, a ferry boat peacefully begins a journey south. It leaves the outer reaches of the harbour to cross the 50-kilometre wide Cook Strait. The Pacific Ocean and the Tasman Sea meet through this narrow passage, which forms an effective barrier between the two halves of New Zealand. The ferry winds its way through the Marlborough Sounds at the eastern tip of the South Island. Further west is the sparsely populated shoreline of Nelson Province. Nelson Province has some of the highest sunshine hours in New Zealand, but only 3% of the country's population. With its deserted beaches and unspoilt beauty, a large area of coast and hills has been set aside as a national park. The first European to sail into these waters, the Dutch explorer Abel Tasman, named the newly discovered land New Zealand after a province of his home country. Abel Tasman National Park is one of the country's most spectacular playgrounds. A nation of sea lovers. The numerous passages and bays of the Sounds offer ample opportunity for peaceful sailing. Captain Cook anchored in this bay when he visited the coast 130 years after Tasman. It became his main base for exploring the Western Pacific. Another early explorer was nearly shipwrecked when he attempted to sail through a narrow pass nearby. A swirling torrent of water races through each tide change. The French navigator was lucky to get through what is now known as French Pass. Dolphins have a long association with boats using the Sounds. One, known as Pelorus Jack, used to pilot ships safely through the turbulent waters of French Pass. Today's generation is just as friendly. The clear waters of the Sounds are also being used for a new industry, aquaculture. On long ropes suspended from the buoys are clusters of mussels, the New Zealand clam. They're destined for meal tables around the world. Across a small harbour, protected by its 13-kilometre-long boulder bank, lies Nelson, the largest town in the region. A monument marks the exact centre of the country, one of Nelson's novel claims to fame. It's primarily known for its horticultural production. The good climate helps surrounding orchards produce most of the country's apple crop and all of its tobacco and hops. The northwestern tip of the South Island is a 26-metre long sand spit. Quartz sandstone from the western coast deposited by ocean currents into a curving bar. Farewell Spit is now a bird sanctuary. South from the Spit starts the long expanse of the west coast. An isolated region, 80% uninhabited, nestles against New Zealand's largest mountain range. Large, high-altitude snowfields form vast icy reservoirs. They eventually feed the glaciers that wind their way down both sides of the range. These impressive vistas attract more than just the occasional climber. In contrast to Nelson's sunshine, the west coast has the country's highest rainfall. The Alps trap the prevailing westerly winds. The melting glaciers and the rainfall feed numerous rivers. In some of the riverbeds, there's a special prize, New Zealand jade. The factories which craft the jade into tourist souvenirs and ornaments are sited on the coast, in towns that are only skeletons of their former size. Their boom was in the 1860s, when the draw was gold. Today, solitary dredgers still find it profitable to rework tailings of sites which 100 years ago attracted thousands of miners. Westport, the coast's biggest town, is hoping for the revival of another old industry, coal. The world energy crisis has made coal once more an economical fuel, and the vast high-quality reserves at the Stockton open cast mine are exported to Japan. An 8-kilometre cableway takes the coal from the mine down to the coast. its wet climate and general isolation, the west coast has remained one of New Zealand's most untouched areas. East, across the Alps, the climate is much drier. The intensely cultivated Canterbury Plains stretch from the Alpine foothills to the Pacific coast. The plains were formed by the rivers washing down shingle and silt from the distant Alps. Salmon spawn in their lower reaches. The rich alluvial soils produce the best mixed farming in the country. Most of New Zealand's grain comes from this area. Irrigation has lessened the chance of drought during the long, hot summers. The people of the plains remain close to their agricultural background. A country fair. Wood chopping, an essential skill in pioneering days, has been turned into a sport. Teams of axemen travel from outlying districts to compete. Christchurch, the most English of New Zealand cities and the largest in the South Island. It spreads from the coast across the Canterbury Plains. The 200 hectares of Christchurch's Hagley Park, with its hundreds of English trees planted by the early settlers, give its citizens an open space ideal for leisure activities. A river winds through the peaceful park, the Avon. Protected by a small range of hills to the south of the city is the Port Lyttelton. The sheltered harbour was formed by a volcanic crater, and the town is built on the remaining crater wall. From the volcanic peninsula around Lyttelton, the coast leads on to the foot of the South Island, with its western fjords and the country's fourth city, Dunedin. A surf carnival at Dunedin's Warrington Beach. The participants need to be rather hardy. The waters of the Pacific Ocean are beginning to be cooled by currents from the southern Antarctic seas. The founders of Dunedin built their city around an octagon. Of Scottish descent, they were used to the harsher climate of the south. They established the first university in New Zealand during the prosperous period that followed the 1860s gold rush. More sedate now, Dunedin's Scottish heritage is still strong. Inland at the southern end of the Alps is Lake Te Anau, the most convenient departure place to view the remote and spectacular southwest corner of the country. The vast area of Fiordland has not been fully explored. Some parts are only visited by the occasional hunter or fisherman. It contains some of the country's most dramatic scenery. Three or 4 days walking takes trampers across the Milford Track, from Lake Te Anau, over the spectacular pass and down to the Milford Sound. The fjords and lakes were gouged out of the rock by the glaciers of the last ice age. Extending to the southern end of the country, the primal landscape has been formed in relatively recent geological times. New Zealand is a young country in terms of human settlement too. With its small population, it's still a largely unspoiled country. The beauty and variety of its landscape is best appreciated from the air.